you'd like to address your question to. So the first question, I think the gentleman in the back, in the blue coat, G.
Thank you. Thank you, Excellency, Secretary-General and Advisor to the Prime Minister. I am Iqbal Badruddin and I am the leader for Fridays for Future Pakistan movement. My question is, what does the United Nations intend to do for climate change after the withdrawal of United States from the Paris Agreement? Thank you.
Well, as I said, it is essential that the biggest emitters assume leadership, because obviously, if the biggest emitters do not assume leadership, our objectives to reach carbon neutrality by 2050 will be undermined. Our strategy has been, in relation to the US society, to work closely with the local authorities, with mayors, with governors, to work closely with the business community, the financial sector, the industries. And I have to say that I've seen an enormous mobilization in the American society to such an extent that the US has reduced emissions in 2019. 2019 is a year in which I believe the emissions probably have risen still a little bit, or been more or less at the same level after 2 years of increase in 2017 and 18. The good news is that thanks to the mobilization of the American society, independently of the positions of the US government, the US was able to reduce emissions in 2019. And we'll go on with the same strategy, working very closely with the different areas of the American society that are absolutely essential to make sure that the US always contributes to the battle that is essential for the planet to survive.
Okay, thank you. Would you like to add something?
I just want to add that, you know, at Madrid, this was one of the main questions on the table, and it was really disappointing for the US government not to be there. But at the same time, on the sidelines, we had a very strong presence from the, I would say, the alternate government, which is the Democratic Party. They had their big leaders, the mayors of a lot of, as you point out, the state governments were there, and they wanted to show what they have done. And I'm very glad to learn that, you know, their emissions actually went down in 2019. So I think there is action happening, but it's not at the government level. So I think this is something that would not be a roadblock to the climate solution.
Thank you. Next question. To the young lady. Yes, the one with the jacket here, right?
Good afternoon, His Excellence. My name is Manahal Kader, and I am the youngest climate activist from Fridays for Future Pakistan. My question to you is that people in less polluting developing countries have this mindset that why should we be more environmentally conscious when no matter what we do, our nation is still going to be at the risk of climate disasters even though we are not involved in climate change? How can people here be encouraged to do their part in caring for the environment? Thank you.
Well, the truth is that some of the largest emitters in the world are developing countries because of the dimension of their economies. So it's not enough that the developed world delivers, the developing world also must deliver. And that is why it is so important to mobilize the commitments that were made in Paris, commitment of $100 billion per year to support the developing world, and to channel those commitments not only to mitigation, but also to adaptation. And I'm very happy that the World Bank, that has announced $400 billion for the next 5 years, has decided that half of it would be for adaptation, half of it would be for mitigation. And one of the major concerns I have in 2020, as we approach Glasgow, is to make sure that the developed world is able to clarify how these $100 billion will be mobilized. They will have sources, both the private and the public sector, but there is still an unclear, not transparent situation in the way finance is mobilized for climate action, And one of my main concerns is exactly to make sure that in 2020 this can be clarified. And that is the reason why the special envoy that I've appointed for climate action and climate finance is Mark Carney, that was governor of the Bank of England, and probably the person in the financial sector that has fought more bravely in order to establish mechanisms to guarantee that the financial instruments serve climate action instead of being an obstacle to them, to it.
Would you like to?
Yes, I think what the Honorable Secretary General pointed out, finance and the focus on adaptation being the key areas over here. But to answer your question, I mean, this is something that we think of. I mean, I have mentioned it in my presentation also, but do nothing is not an option available to us. We have to do what we can do. And I think that's what we are doing in Pakistan. We may not be doing enough, but we are not doing nothing. We are doing a lot and more than our share, and we will keep on doing it. And hopefully the Secretary General will get the world to get together in unity to do it also.
Next question. Okay, I'm going to choose the women. So the lady in the corner.
Good afternoon, His Excellency. Thank you very much for a very insightful talk. My name is Momi Salim, and I'm an environmental researcher and advocate based in Islamabad. As you have mentioned in your talk already, that over 90% of Pakistan's surface water resources are currently used for agriculture purposes. And climate change is already posing threat to our natural resources, especially water resources. So how do we ensure food security given that less water will be available for agriculture in coming years? Your thoughts on that, sir?
Well, I think that I don't know the Pakistani agriculture in depth. I know a little bit more of my own country's agriculture. And I think that many countries in the world have a lot to do in order to improve the productivity of the use of water in agriculture. We sometimes still use too much water. I think at the same time we need to make sure, as it was mentioned, there are dramatic floods everywhere. We need to be able to capture the water of the floods and to use it instead of letting the floods just destroy the soil and have very dramatic consequences for the countries. So there is on one hand the question of management related to, and this of course requires infrastructure, and of course requires finance, in order to be able to better preserve the water resources we have. And of course I'm very worried with seeing melting the water in the glaciers in the Himalayas. I mean, I was recently in another country of the region, Bangladesh. The risks of the coastal area of Bangladesh being flooded by the sea is terrible. And of course, one other problem is as there is less water coming from the rivers, the salinization progresses, and that is another threat to agriculture. But again, I think we also need to do more everywhere. As I said, I don't know very well the Pakistani situation, to do more to use water in a more effective way. We sometimes waste a lot of water still with traditional practices, and there are situations in which we practically are able to produce agriculture in the desert. I mean, with very well-managed forms of irrigation.
Thank you.
I just want to add to that the Recharge Pakistan project actually is a project to address that very issue. We have a lot of water in Pakistan. We say we are water stressed, but I think we are poorly managed. We've got a poorly managed water system. And one of the things I learned, there was a recent research that came out of 37 river basins of the world. The river Indus was the most stressed river basin in the world. And the reason was that although we sit on the second largest sweet water aquifer in the world. This is something I didn't know of. I found out about 2 months back that we have the second largest sweet water aquifer beneath our river system. But we are drawing down on it very fast and not recharging it properly. I think the Recharge Pakistan project is that although you have this huge mass of water, 30 million acre feet of water that goes and we flush it down into the Indus. So I think this Recharge Pakistan project is to capture that water, restore the natural ecosystem so that it can recharge the aquifer, and then the system starts coming back. So we are working on that. It's at the project is submitted to the GCF for its feasibility, and as I said, the Chinese government is also helping us. And that's because they did it in China. In the Three Gorges Dam, they created two bigger wetland lakes south of that dam to recharge the aquifer. And I think this is something that we need to do in Pakistan.
Thank you. Again, the lady with the hand up.
Hello, hi. My name is Anam Rathore, and I'm an environment and climate change activist. So I'm going to continue on slightly on the previous question. So there's a growing regional tension between India and Pakistan, and there's a, there can be possible escalation. And a lot of water in Pakistan comes through, like, from India. So the water crisis is Pakistan is growing. Given that we are a riparian country, a lot of the people's livelihood depend on agriculture. So how can the UN play a role in conflict resolution?
Well, there was an agreement between India and Pakistan, and there is a system in which the World Bank, the World Bank is involved. And obviously, what I would ask the two countries is to have a clear cooperation in relation to water. And I have some moral authority. I was Prime Minister of Portugal when we established an agreement with Spain. It is probably one of the landmark agreements of common water management of two countries. Our rivers come from Spain. And it was possible to have an agreement between the two countries on the common management of our rivers. And I think this example shows that with effective cooperation and dialogue, all these problems can and must be solved. Because if one country thinks that solving the problem and letting the others in a bad situation, it's a good thing, it is not. Because in the end, then things turn against everybody. So it is clear that water must be an instrument of peace and not an instrument of conflict.
Thank you.
I think the Excellency pointed out in his speech also that water is the critical issue to climate change. And with Pakistan and India, the problem is that we have this treaty called the Indus Water Treaty. It was negotiated in the 1960s. There are two main aspects which are missing in that. The first and the most important one is climate variance. Now, under the Indus Water Treaty, the water that comes in, there are two main sources, monsoons and the glaciers. And both are affected by climate change now. But we have not discussed this climate variance. It needs to be discussed. And the other aspect is the aquifer that I talked about. This is an aquifer we share with India. It is not a part of the treaty. So, because the drawdown is so large, it started getting affected. So I think there needs to be a dialogue on this, but at the moment, there's no chance with what is happening right now.
Next question. Okay, for the gender balance, the gentleman with the red tie. Mike, please.
Thank you very much. My name is Zahid Latif Khan, and I represent the capital market of Pakistan. It was quite heartening to listen to your speech, Excellency Antonio, that you mentioned that although Pakistan is getting affected from the environmental hazards, but it's not contributing towards the environment world over. So actually we have seen that internationally there are a few countries which have got the carbon exchange, carbon credit exchange. So I was just wondering that because of the lack of resources in Pakistan, how United Nations can help in establishing this sort of a thing so that people become more responsible in using the carbon emission. So this is my question. Thank you.
One of the things that my new special envoy, that starts with March, Mark Carney, has been trying to mobilize in his function today as governor of a central bank, is to mobilize all central banks in the world to establish new rules for the financial sector to be able to disclose the climate-related risks of financial operations. Today we have a disclosure of risks for reasons that are essentially economic. It's necessary to translate the reality of climate into the financial risks. On the other hand, we have been working hard. I created a coalition of CEOs of especially asset management funds. We are working hard with pension funds and with others, and I believe there are many of these funds in Pakistan, in order to make sure that their portfolios shift. The portfolios of the funds that are working with us are still, at the present moment, are still compatible, according to the companies that they represent, to an increase of temperature at the end of the century to 3 to 4 degrees, which means that it is in the interests of us all that asset managers make a shift, progressive shift to the green economy in their portfolios. And I would say that, if I may be a little bit brutal, there is a good reason for that. It is clear that assets related to the brown economy, namely some aspects of fossil fuels, in the future, their value will inevitably decrease. And so it makes sense from the point of view, for instance, of a pension fund to protect the pension money of the people involved, to get rid of those assets that will tend to decrease in its value, and to bet in the assets that will increase its value, as it is the case of those related to the green economy. I have made personally a small investment in a fund, the green fund, and I have to say that that green fund is growing much more quickly than all the other small investments that I made, which means that the green economy is now the good economy, and it means that the financial sector is becoming, very interestingly, a driver pushing governments to change regulations, pushing governments, because some of these things require government regulations, pushing governments to assume more clearly responsibilities in this regard. So I'm very hopeful that the financial sector will become more and more an ally in climate action, based not on, in some cases based on, I would say, even a generous approach, because more and more companies and banks and institutions feel that their staff is concerned about climate action, that the children of those CEOs are concerned about these things. So there is a shift that is authentic. But then there is enlightened self-interest. Why to bet in things that have no future? No. The logic of business is to invest in the economy that has a future. And the economy that has a future is a green economy, not a brown economy.
Thank you. Next question, the gentleman in the paisley tie. Oh, sorry, striped tie.
Thank you. Your Excellency, welcome to Islamabad in Pakistan. It's wonderful to have you here with us. Paris Agreement gave us a lot of hope.
Mike, Mike.
Is it working now?
Yeah, yeah.
So there was a lot of hope with the Paris Agreement, but for a lot of us in Pakistan and across the world, that hope is quickly turning to fear and tragedy. Given what's happening with the climate talks, we've seen disappointment after disappointment. How long do you think we can continue to base our collective hopes on climate negotiations that are led by some countries who've got different means of going about the negotiations? I guess my question to you is, climate is being disrupted. Is there a disruption needed within the climate talks, within the climate negotiations process to move things forward? Thank you.
Well, it is true, if one looks at Madrid, that today governments are to a certain extent lagging behind what is happening in societies. But it is also true that the pressure is mounting, and is mounting for a number of reasons. First, there are economic reasons. The green economy is becoming the most profitable one. My country, Portugal, has launched recently a bid for solar energy, for a number of plants of solar energy. And they got in the proposals for that bid the cheapest price ever for electricity anywhere from whatever source. No, so it is clear, and much cheaper than coal and much cheaper than natural gas, that my country is closing the coal plants, one in 2021, the other in 2023. Natural gas will still remain part as a kind of a, system of equilibrium of the network, but the bet has been in the renewables. And they got now prices that are astounding. I think, if I remember well, $14 per megawatt hour. but these I'm not so sure, it's just by memory. Which means that, I mean, to invest in fossil fuel production of energy is a mistake for the future. It is to have more expensive electricity in the future, which doesn't make any sense. On the other hand, we see that in all other areas, the green economy is becoming the most attractive. So there is a pressure I mentioned from the financial sectors. On the other hand, in Europe, 2 years ago, and I speak for Europe because it's my area, 2 years ago, all the elections, the key factor was migration. Last year, the key factor was climate. So public opinions are starting to put a lot of pressure on governments in relation to climate. And it's very interesting that because of that, the European governments have now committed, with the exception of Poland, but I mean, I hope that this problem will also be solved, to the carbon neutrality in 2050. Because the pressure of the electorate, I mean, was very clear. On the other hand, the movements of the civil society, the youth movement, is enormous. And I am quite convinced that we will witness in the next 1, 2, 3 years a much stronger commitment of governments to move forward. And I hope that it will be possible to translate it already in Glasgow. The key is the big emitters. And it's absolutely, more than 70 countries have committed already to carbon neutrality. But they represent only 15% of the emissions. The big emitters need to commit to the same objective. And we need now to do everything possible to make sure that the big emitters also assume that responsibility. And I think that there is also a growing conscience that in their countries that is needed. So we are not yet there. We are still losing the battle, but I think that the conditions are starting to be created for us to win the war.
Thank you. Next question. The lady in the blue. Sorry, I'm going to go back to the women now.
Assalamu alaikum. My name is Saida Hadika Jamshed and I'm working on carbon market project in Pakistan. On? Carbon markets in Pakistan. And I have a question for Honorable Secretary-General. The developed countries are failing to keep their climate finance pledge of 100 billion each year. And without it, developing countries will not be able to cope up with the climate change impacts. So how exactly is the international community planning to ensure that this promise is fulfilled?
Now, the question is to make sure that the commitments that were made, in particular the commitments to adaptation, are met. And this is what, as I said, we still need a clarification, and I hope that in Glasgow that clarification will be real. We are seeing also the mobilization of resources beyond that. We are seeing all the international financial institutions investing more and more money in these. We are seeing a big success, for instance, in green bonds everywhere. So I think there are reasons for hope beyond that. But one thing is clear, there were commitments made in Paris, namely by the developed countries. Those commitments need to be met in a transparent way.
Would you like to add? Okay, next question, the gentleman in the yellow tie. Yes.
Excellency, thank you very much. On behalf of the business community of Pakistan, I want to thank you for the sentiments expressed for the people of Pakistan. We love you too, sir. And sir, to achieve sustainable development, peace and security is a must. Peace and security is a must to achieve SDGs. Now, what is happening in Kashmir, it is affecting our economy, our business, and 220 million people, they have been waiting to listen to you, and those in Kashmir are expecting that you would play a role to ease their lives. It's 197 days that they are under oppression. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I've always been strongly advocating the need for an enhanced dialogue between India and Pakistan, and even offered my good offices more than once. Of course, good offices can only be implemented it if they are accepted by both parties. And we have been expressing very clearly the absolute need for human rights to be fully respected in Kashmir. By the way, if there has been any solid contribution for that, are the two reports that were presented by the Human Rights High Commissioner on the situation that I believe have had a very important role in clarifying the situation. So our strong commitment is clear. Human rights must be respected everywhere in the world, but also there.
Thank you. Next question, the lady in white.
My name is Anam Zaib. I'm a climate change activist. What strategies does the UN have for addressing the melting of glaciers in the Hindu Kush Himalayan Karakoram region? And shouldn't this be a priority area in the new UN negotiations, given that it supplies billions of users downstream with water and their livelihoods?
Well, the melting of glaciers as the destruction of the ice cap are, of course, an enormous preoccupation, but we cannot solve the problem of the melting of glaciers without solving the problem of global warming. So the melting of glaciers requires that we win the battle against climate change. I mean, there is not a way to protect the glaciers if the temperatures rise. The fight for the glaciers is the same fight for the ice cap. Look at Antarctica. Antarctica registered a few days ago 20.75 degrees Celsius. Can you imagine 20.75 degrees Celsius in Antarctica, which is never heard of? So if we want to preserve the glaciers and the ice caps in this world, we cannot preserve them by themselves. We need to reduce temperature rise.
Thank you. Next question. Shoaib Sultan Saab ko please, in the front row, age over.
May I extend a very warm welcome to Your Excellency. I'm Shoaib Sultan, associated with rural support programs in Pakistan. I would like to exploit your presence, Excellency, to influence the advisor to the Prime Minister, because I was very encouraged by his presentation, and especially the word people-centric written in red. And I think also he said a very important thing, that Pakistan is first in forming policies, but very, very slow in implementing it. Now when we talk of people-centric, where are the people? Who are the people whom are going to involve? And that's where I like to submit that over these last 38 years, in Pakistan, rural support programs have been mobilizing communities. And we have now 8 million rural households organized out of 20 million in the country. And I'm glad that IUCN Aban is here. She helped me when I was working in AKRSP. And the people there, about 40,000 communities implemented and planted 50 million trees in no time. And I'm glad that you have got a secretary here now, Naeed, who helped me in mobilizing 2.7 million women households in Sindh. So that is there. I'm prepared to link them up with the climate change. And I entirely agree with you that without making it people-centric, we would not be able to achieve this goal. Thank you.
Thank you. We're running out of time, so just the last, I think.
This is for your.
Let me just add, Dr. Shoaib Saab is, of course, an icon in the industry. We are looking at that option, and at the moment we are working with the provincial forest governments. But there are some of them which are faltering, and as soon as they falter, we'll be heading over to the RSPs to help us in taking this process forward. I think this is a resource that we have, that we've developed over the years, with a direct link to the households, and it can be a big help to us in our plantation project.
Last question, the lady in the front. With the mic, please.
Pakistan and appreciate your recognition of Pakistan's hospitality to the refugees. My name is Huma Mustafa Beg and I run Serendip, which is a development communications company. And I just wanted to bring your attention to the approach of the United Nations to the countries which are not in line. So we've continued to witness the failure of forcing countries in corporate action with words, but not with law. And it's fear of accidents and a ticket that keeps all of us on the road, on the right side of the road. So my question is that if the experts have concluded that climate change is a moral issue, then what do you think that the current United Nations system as it is it relevant in solving this issue with love and not fear? Because I personally feel that we need to be much more tougher because love hasn't gotten us very far.
Well, I think that it is true that the UN has been clearly leading the global debate on climate change exactly with that same feeling of solidarity that is necessary to express. Obviously, we have an intergovernmental mechanism, which is the Conference of States Party. Like all intergovernmental mechanisms, is slow, but in the mobilization of the business community, in the mobilization of local authorities, regional authorities, the civil society, the people, I think the UN has been clearly in the front line, and it is from the people that the feeling that you expressed can come. So these are things that are difficult to translate in international law. Even the Paris Agreement, as you know, is an agreement that is not entirely mandatory. I mean, all this was the compromise that was possible, and the Paris Agreement is not enough. But I think that we are contributing to generate a strong feeling, a common responsibility of this generation in relation to the future generations. We talk about love. I have 3 granddaughters. I have 3 granddaughters. I love my granddaughters. I wouldn't leave them, I wouldn't like for them to live in the kind of world we would have if temperatures would rise by 3 or 4 degrees at the end of the century. That would be a disaster. So if I want to take care of my granddaughters, if we all want to take care of our granddaughters and daughters, we need to do much more than what we are doing.
Thank you. I think on that note, we're going to conclude the question and answer session. We've run out of time. I'd like to request the advisor to come onto the podium to say a few last words.
I just wanted to thank His Excellency for coming here and for the deep, enlightening talk with a very deep understanding of climate change. But I think more importantly, we saw through the passion to solve the problem. I think that's what's come out, and we really thank you for that. And Pakistan is waiting for the climate problem to be solved. Thank you very much.
And thank you very much, and a lot of success in all the programs that you have explained to us today.
गुफ्तगू सुन रहे थे आप अक़वाम मुत्तहिदा के सेक्रेटरी जनरल एंटोनियो गुतेरेस की, जो कि मौसमियाती तब्दीली से मुतालिक तकरीब से खिताब और उसके बाद सवाल व जवाब के सेशन से बातचीत कर रहे थे। उनसे मुख्तलिफ नौइयत के सवालात किए गए, लेकिन उससे पहले उन्होंने इस बात का बरमला इजहार किया, एतराफ़ किया कि पाकिस्तान ने क्लाइमेट चेंज के हवाले से जो काविशें, जो इक़दामात और जो खिदमात पेश की हैं, उनका ख़ास तौर पर इदराक है। आलमी बिरादरी को भी, अक़वाम मुत्तहिदा को भी इस मौके पर उन्होंने खिराज तहसीन पेश किया और ये भी बताया कि क्लाइमेट चेंज के हवाले से पाकिस्तान उन ममालिक में शामिल नहीं जो क्लाइमेट चेंज का बाइस हैं, बल्कि उन ममालिक में शामिल है जो क्लाइमेट चेंज से मुतासिर होते हैं, और पाकिस्तान सबसे बड़ा मुल्क है जो मुतासिर हो रहा है। फिर दीगर चंद मसाइल के हवाले से भी उनसे गुफ्तगू की गई। उनसे पूछा गया पानी का एक बहुत बड़ा तनाज़ा भारत और पाकिस्तान का चल रहा है, इस पर भी उन्होंने इजहार ख्याल किया कि पानी तनाज़ा नहीं बल्कि अमन की वजह होना चाहिए, बाइस होना